Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to week 1 of Sagalong. So Sagalong, for those who are new, is a yearly event in which several other booktubers and myself invite people to read the Sagas of the Icelanders, which is a wonderful body of prose literature from the Middle Ages. This year, we are all reading together Egil's Saga, which is a saga that was written from around 1220 to 1240 and takes place from around 850 to 1000 AD. And I know that because I'm reading from this wonderful Penguin Deluxe edition of the Sagas of the Icelanders, which a lot of my fellow hosts read from. If you've been following Sagalong, you're probably familiar with this edition, and a lot of people just like this edition who aren't involved in Sagalong. But Egil's Saga, like most sagas, does not have a formal author attributed. It's usually thought of as by an anonymous author, although there is some speculation, again, according to the brief introductory text to this edition, that Snorri Sturluson wrote it. And Snorri Sturluson is famous for writing the prose Edda, as well as the Heimskringla, which is this sort of mytho-historical account of the kings of Norway, which we actually read a chunk of for one Sagalong. We read the chunk in that work about King Harold's saga. But anyway, so it might be by Snorri Sturluson, it might not be. Nobody's quite sure, it seems. But anyway, to get away from talking about the saga in general and to dive into what it's about, so far in this first chunk that we read, we read chapters 1 through 22 for this week. In this chunk, the title character, Egil, does not appear. He doesn't exist yet, it seems. He's not born. So we're almost a quarter of the way through the saga, and we have not met the title character. What distinguishes this saga from some of the other sagas that we've read, it seems, is that it really, at least in this first part, doesn't take place primarily in Iceland. It actually, in this first part, has taken place exclusively, I believe, in Norway, and it sounds like parts of Finland as well. And so, when the story opens, we learn that this guy named King Harold is trying to subjugate all the other kings in Norway. There were a number of small kingdoms in Norway, and King Harold was this really powerful king who wanted to be king of all Norway. And at the beginning of this saga, we see him trying to subjugate these rival kingdoms. And briefly, we get some account of the struggles of certain kingdoms against Harold. But one character kind of emerges from this wider account as a central character, and he's named Kveldulf, and he is a guy who does not seem interested in dealing with these conflicts between these kings. He stays aloof. He doesn't join the resistance against Harold. He doesn't join Harold himself. But once Harold takes over all of Norway and becomes king, he sends a messenger to Kveldulf, basically telling him that I'm the king now, you need to serve me, and Kveldulf says that he doesn't want to, but that he'll send his son Thorolf in his stead to serve the king. And the king, I guess, is fine with that, and so Thorolf, Kveldulf's son, goes to serve the king, and becomes one of his most valued soldiers. However, there is a falling out between Thorolf and Harold, as happens in sagas. In particular, there's an incident where Thorolf invites Harold to a banquet at his residence, and when Harold arrives, he comes with 300 men in his sort of retinue, and as it turns out, Thorolf has 500 men in the banquet hall. And also, it's mentioned, it's an interesting little detail, it's mentioned that in the banquet hall, there are shields hanging all around the walls, and that detail is pointed to specifically in the text, and so I'm guessing it's important, but really what happens is Harold takes the fact that Thorolf has more men at this banquet hall than he does as a threat. He takes it as Thorolf kind of flexing his muscles, kind of showing that he's planning to challenge Harold for power, and so Harold is infuriated at this banquet. But then Thorolf kind of reassures him. He takes him out to the harbor and gives him a gift of this ship. Actually, in the scene where Thorolf takes Harold out to the harbor by himself, I thought that maybe he was fixing to, like, assassinate him, but he didn't. He just gave him a gift. And so, briefly, it seems like that tension is eased. But then, it is rekindled when these brothers, who believe that they've been cheated out of their inheritance by Thorolf, begin to feed Harold, the king, slander about Thorolf. They begin to tell him that, oh, Thorolf is trying to depose you, and, you know, he's embezzling money from you. Thorolf has this sort of seemingly rather important job of collecting tribute from the Lapps, as they're called, Lapp, who I'm guessing are people from Finland, because my understanding is that there's an area in Finland called Lapland. And Karelia is also mentioned in this saga, and I believe that's also in Finland. Editing Lukash here to tell you that when I googled it, I found out that the Sami people are often referred to as Lapps. So there you go. So apparently there are some areas of Finland that Harold has sort of in his grip, but Thorolf has this important job of collecting tribute from the Lapps, and I believe from a place called Halogaland. And these two brothers tell the king that he's sort of enriching himself through that position. And so eventually Harold punishes Thorolf by giving that position to the brothers. And what actually happens, what's kind of funny, is that when the brothers go to collect tribute, the people of the Lapps and the people of Halogaland do not like them as much as they liked Thorolf, so they don't give as much tribute. So when the brothers come back to give the tribute that they've collected to the king, they don't bring as much as Thorolf did, which is pointed out by the king, because what the brothers had told him was that he was doing a bad job of collecting tribute, and so he wasn't getting as much tribute as he should have. But then when the brothers go to collect tribute themselves, they don't get as much tribute as Thorolf did for the king. I thought that was a funny little detail, because it's like, you learn a lot about how in these corrupt governments, things are always run really incompetently, and it's just funny to see that, you know, that goes all the way back to the 800s AD, right? You can probably see where this is all going. This kind of feud between Thorolf and Harold continues, and it boils over into violence, and this chunk is bookended with Thorolf being killed, Thorolf and all of his men being slaughtered by Harold, and their hall being burned down as well. And what's interesting about that last battle scene, and one or two other scenes where there's fighting in this saga, is that the fighting is not described in nearly the level of detail as it is in Njal Saga, which we read last year and which was wonderful. One of the highlights of Njal Saga was the really detailed, really vivid action set pieces. And it seems, at least in this first chunk, there just isn't going to be that. The battle scenes are much more broadly described. There's very little, I mean, in Njal Saga, you would specifically get descriptions of how Warrior A killed Warrior B. It wouldn't just be, oh, they fought, and then one side won. It would be, oh, Warrior A, slid across the ice and threw his axe into another guy's skull. Like, it was that level of detail. But here, we get much broader strokes of the battle. And it'll be interesting to see whether it becomes apparent that that's deliberate. It could just be that the author who wrote Egil Saga just wasn't as good at writing these kinds of battle scenes as the author of Njal Saga was, which is fine. But it could also be that it was a deliberate stylistic choice, perhaps. I'm not sure. But that was one thing I noticed. And the other big theme that comes out of this saga that I think, again, distinguishes it from some of the other sagas that I've read is how it explores tyranny. The tyranny of this King Harold, who, we open with him basically subjugating these rival kingdoms, right? We begin with a brief description of the resistance against him, which is crushed, and then we have a portrait of his rule, which comes off as really tyrannical and possibly corrupt as well. And again, it's interesting always reading old accounts like this and just seeing that there's very little that's new under the sun, right? And so those are the two big themes that come out so far. A lot of the other stuff that's gone on seems like pretty standard saga stuff, a lot of sagas have kind of cycles of revenge and violence, and we obviously have that between Thorolf and Harold, and I'm guessing that that's just going to continue for the future chunks. But yeah, so those were some observations I got out of it. I am enjoying it so far. You know, I'm kind of waiting for Egil to appear. One thing I'm excited about is that Egil is supposed to be a great poet, and so I'm excited to see what the poetry is like. There are actually long passages of poetry that we will come to in this saga, and I'm excited to see what those will be like, because I haven't read any Icelandic poetry, so that should be interesting. But anyway, those are my thoughts on Egil's saga. If you're reading along with us, and I'm sure my hosts are watching, so if any of you who are watching have any thoughts, please let me know down in the comments. And I will leave it at that. Next week, we are reading chapters 23 through 44. So if you're reading along, have those read by next weekend, and we can chat about them then. But anyway, I will let you all go, and talk to you later.